Can just one look of disdain cost you $2.8 billion? The old silver SUV, its paint faded by time, rolled to a quiet stop in front of the Grand Royale Hotel, a place hailed as a paradise for those born to live in luxury. Late afternoon rain drizzled against the car windows, leaving streaks like the lines of time itself. The door opened, and out stepped a man who, to anyone watching, looked like nothing more than an out-of-luck engineer or a salesman recently laid off. Ethan Ward, the name revered across the global tech world, the founder of the $40 billion empire tech empire, looked nothing like the powerful CEO he truly was. Tonight, he appeared to be just an ordinary traveler in a worn grey jacket, wrinkled khaki pants, and scuffed sneakers. A dried coffee stain on his cuff was the perfect finishing touch to the careless, unremarkable image he had deliberately crafted. His eyes seemed tired, weighed down as if by sleepless nights. But for anyone observant enough, there was something else hidden there, the calm, sharp focus of a man trained to read every subtle gesture of human behavior. He moved slowly up the steps, hands tucked in his pockets, exuding nothing that might draw attention apart from his quiet presence. The staff nearby didn't bother to hide their judgmental glances. A young doorman frowned slightly, tilting his head and muttering into his earpiece, his voice low enough for most not to hear, but not low enough to escape Ethan's ears. Probably another broker trying to hunt for rich clients here. Ethan didn't turn around. The corner of his mouth curved slightly, not in amusement, but in the faint smile of someone who had long grown used to such snap judgments. It didn't bother him. In fact, this was exactly what he wanted. The Grand Royale, famed for its rare wine collections and lavish parties praised endlessly by the press, was the perfect stage for Ethan's experiment. He wasn't here as a VIP, no red carpet, no welcoming smiles or polite bows. He wanted a simple truth. How would they treat him when they didn't know who he was? That truth would determine whether Empire Tech would proceed with a multi-billion-dollar partnership with this hotel chain. The crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, their light reflecting off the marble floors as he stepped inside the lobby. He looked nothing like the guests who usually frequented this place, and that was precisely the point. Throughout his career, Ethan had witnessed too many times when human worth was measured by brand labels and the cars people drove. Tonight, he would see firsthand what culture truly lived within these walls. No assistants, no bodyguards, no staff rushing to open doors for him. Just one man, ordinary in every visible way, quietly walking into a world where people believed they had the right to judge someone's worth with a single glance. And Ethan knew, from this moment on, every look, every word, every gesture, no matter how small, would reveal the hotel's true nature. The test had already begun, and no one, not even those smirking behind his back, realized that they were about to pay dearly for the way they judged a man, solely by his appearance. Stepping through the thick glass doors, Ethan felt as if he had entered another world, a world where the glittering glow of crystal chandeliers and the delicate scent of expensive essential oils were carefully arranged to flaunt luxury. The sharp click of high heels echoed against the marble floor, blending with the soft laughter of guests draped in perfectly tailored suits, creating a symphony of artificial perfection. Ethan moved slowly toward the reception desk, his hands still tucked in the pockets of his worn jacket, his eyes sweeping the room with the curiosity of an ordinary guest. But beneath that calm exterior, every glance, every smile, every gesture of the staff was being carefully recorded by his sharp, calculating mind. Behind the desk, Samantha Clark, the head receptionist of the Grand Royale, was glued to her computer screen. Her cold, sharp eyes only lifted when Ethan's footsteps stopped in front of her. In that brief instant, Ethan caught the quick flicker of her gaze, scanning him from the faded jacket to the scuffed shoes and the dried coffee stain on his cuff. She gave him a smile, not the kind that welcomed guests, but a half smile of someone who had just found a reason to doubt him. Ethan placed a platinum card on the counter. He said nothing, offered no explanation, his expression calm, as if his silence alone was a test. Samantha glanced down at the card, raising an eyebrow with deliberate drama, then looked back at him, her voice coated in false sweetness, but laced with condescension. "Are you sure this card is yours?" The question was loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. A young couple dressed in designer clothes glanced over. The man smirked, leaning toward his companion, whispering just loud enough for others to catch. No way a guy like that has a platinum card. He probably borrowed it. Ethan didn't react, his eyes steady, calm, as if he had heard such words countless times before. Samantha kept smiling, but her eyes betrayed her disdain. She lifted the card, holding it under the light as if expecting it to glow and confirm its true owner. The gesture was nothing less than a performance for the invisible audience watching nearby. Behind the desk, a young staff member leaned against the counter, glancing at his phone before quickly snapping a photo of Ethan. He tilted his head, chuckling, and whispered to a colleague, "There's going to be some entertainment tonight for sure." Ethan's gaze flicked toward them briefly, but he remained silent. His quiet presence acted like a mirror, reflecting their true nature without him needing to provoke a single word. He stood there, unbothered, his eyes locked on Samantha, as if committing to memory every detail of the little play in which she was clearly the star. Samantha set the card back down on the counter, her fingers tapping the keyboard with exaggerated slowness. But Ethan knew immediately she wasn't actually checking anything. It was a show, each tap just an excuse to stall, as if serving him was a burden. Ethan saw it all, but he waited, silent and patient. In his mind, every glance, every whisper, every smug smile was already weaving itself into a complete picture of how this place treated those they deemed unworthy. And even though the picture was only beginning to take shape, it was already enough to disappoint him. Ethan stood still in front of the reception desk, his gaze calm and steady, like the surface of a still lake. But deep inside, a tide of memories was slowly rising. Every word, every condescending glance from Samantha felt like a blade reopening an old wound. He remembered himself at 17, standing frozen in the corner of a wedding hall, hands trembling as he held a tray of water, dressed in an oversized uniform borrowed from the hotel's storage. That day, he had hoped to serve at the VIP table because the young Ethan believed that if he did well, maybe he would be recognized. But the manager passing by gave him a quick glance, frowned slightly, and uttered a sentence he would never forget. "Not you. You don't have the right face to stand there. Go to the back." He didn't argue, just lowered his head and stepped back towards the kitchen, listening to the sharp sound of shoes tapping as another colleague replaced him. But that sentence haunted him for years. It wasn't just the rejection of a job. It was the denial of a person's worth, judged entirely by appearance. That night, as he walked down a dimly lit street after leaving the hotel, his heart cold and heavy, a silent vow began to form in his mind. One day, he would build a place where people were not judged by the clothes they wore or the face they had. Respect would be the standard, not a reward reserved for those with money. Now, standing in the Grand Royale, watching Samantha lazily tapping at the keyboard, her eyes deliberately avoiding his, Ethan realized that time might have changed him, but prejudice had not changed at all. 18 years had passed, and people like Samantha were simply new versions of the manager who once pushed him out of the spotlight. This world was still obsessed with superficial luxury, and people like Samantha still believed they had the right to decide who deserved to be treated with kindness. Ethan took a slow, deep breath, letting his emotions settle into the calm he had mastered over the years. He didn't get angry, nor did he argue back. He had experienced this too many times to know that an impulsive reaction would only convince them further that they were right. Instead, Ethan chose silence. To him, silence was not weakness. It was a weapon. He let them freely reveal their true nature, allowing every word, every careless gesture to betray who they really were. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at his reflection on the polished counter. He was no longer the boy who had been pushed to the kitchen. He was now a man who could change the outcome of an entire deal with a single nod. And he knew that the Grand Royale, proud of its lavish reputation, was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. The atmosphere in the hotel lobby moved along like a luxurious melody played on repeat. Samantha kept her head down, typing meaningless words on the keyboard, while Ethan stood still, one hand resting lightly on the counter, as if he had all the patience in the world to wait. But at that moment, a small scene in the corner of the lobby unexpectedly caught his attention, a scene no one else seemed to care about. An elderly woman, frail and petite, struggled to pull a suitcase across the thick carpet. The suitcase was nearly twice her size, squeaking with every drag across the marble floor. People around either walked past or even stepped aside as if her struggle was an inconvenience that had nothing to do with them. Then from behind, a boy of about 9 ran over, his tiny hands pushing against the suitcase with all his strength, his eyes full of determination. The old woman turned to him, her clouded eyes lighting up with joy, a trembling smile breaking across her face. They didn't exchange many words, just a small nod of gratitude and a returning smile. A simple happiness that needed no explanation. Ethan watched the entire exchange, his gaze softening for a brief moment as a familiar feeling stirred inside him. In a world of tailored suits and diamond-encrusted watches, it was this kind of unprompted kindness that held true value. This was exactly the kind of culture he had always wanted to build at Empire Tech. Respect and kindness, not because someone was watching, not for rewards or recognition, but simply because it was the right thing to do. But that warmth faded almost instantly when a mocking voice rose from a nearby table. A man in a sleek black suit, holding a glass of champagne, glanced over and sneered. "Country kid. Why bother? That's what the staff is for." The woman sitting with him nodded in agreement, her indifferent eyes glancing at the boy, as if he were doing something out of place in this polished world of luxury. Ethan tilted his head slightly, noting every detail. He didn't step in, didn't say a word, but in his mind, that boy had just become the perfect counterpoint to the picture Grand Royale was painting. A place where genuine kindness seemed out of place. And he understood something clearly. If an anonymous child could instinctively do what was right, then there was no reason a billionaire-dollar establishment couldn't do the same, except for one E. They simply didn't want to. Bathed in the warm, golden light of the chandeliers, Ethan exhaled slowly, hiding a faint, unreadable smile. He revealed nothing on his face, but in that moment, he knew this test was no longer just about service. It had become a test of character, and Grand Royale was failing it minute by minute without even realizing it. The sound of Samantha's meaningless typing continued, like a quiet act of defiance. Ethan stood there, saying nothing, showing no anger. He was like an unmoving stone, letting everyone around him reveal their true nature. But behind that silence, he was carefully noting every detail, placing every action into neat compartments in his mind. Because with just one decision later, everyone here would pay for it. Ethan exhaled softly, pulling his phone from his coat pocket, his movements torso but deliberate. His deep voice broke the stillness as he connected the call. "Lucas, I'm here." On the other end, Lucas Reed, his senior aide and most trusted right hand, answered instantly. "Do you want us to come in now?" Ethan glanced around the lobby, his eyes passing over every face before stopping on Samantha, who deliberately avoided his gaze. His reply was short and calm. 5 minutes. Bring everyone. I want to see exactly how they treat someone they think is a nobody." Lucas paused for a second, his voice dropping as he understood immediately. "Understood. We'll be there." The call ended, and Ethan slid the phone back into his pocket, his movements still casual as if nothing had happened. He lifted his gaze to Samantha, but didn't say a word. That silence alone seemed to slow the air around them. Samantha kept up her act, her eyes flicking to the screen as she spoke in a flat, dismissive tone coated with fake politeness. "I'm sorry, I don't see your name in the system. Perhaps you're at the wrong hotel." Her voice was just loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. A woman in a silk dress let out a small laugh, and the man with her openly looked Ethan up and down with a smirk of disdain. And then, at that very moment, the deep, luxurious hum of an engine rumbled at the entrance. The sound was unmistakable. A silver Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to a stop at the lobby doors, its headlights reflecting sharply off the polished marble floor. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Ethan didn't move, his expression unchanged, as if that car had nothing to do with him. Samantha, however, reacted differently. She straightened slightly, her eyes lighting up with a mix of curiosity and anticipation, clearly waiting to greet real, important guests. She had no idea that in just a few seconds her world was about to turn upside down. The car door opened, and 3 people stepped out. Lucas Reed, immaculate in a dark, tailored suit, Chloe Adams, Empire Tech's sharp-witted head of communications, and Grant Miller, the company's chief financial officer. They moved with deliberate precision, their eyes sweeping the lobby like people who already knew exactly how this scene would play out. Samantha watched them, pasting on a polished smile. But it faltered the moment Lucas's gaze locked directly on Ethan. Lucas strode quickly toward him, his voice carrying clearly across the lobby. Ward, is everything all right here?" Just one sentence, but it landed like a bomb. Samantha froze, her face draining of color instantly, and the guests who had been laughing moments ago now turned wide, eyed toward Ethan. They whispered among themselves. "Ward? Ethan Ward? The CEO of Empire Tech?" Ethan didn't answer Lucas's question. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his eyes meeting Samantha's. There was no anger in his gaze, only a calm, cutting sharpness. The kind of calm that made people feel as though their mistakes had been laid bare for the entire world to see. And in that silence, without saying a single word, Ethan delivered the most powerful statement of all. The air in the lobby thickened immediately after Lucas spoke. Every pair of eyes turned toward Ethan. Whispers died down, and silence swept across the room. Samantha stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keyboard, clinging to it as if it were a lifeline. She had recognized that Tom name, realized that the man she had just treated as someone unworthy was none other than Ethan Ward, the man who could change the fate of an entire corporation with a single decision. Lucas strode toward Ethan, his voice clear, loud enough for every staff member and guest in the lobby to hear. "Mr. Ward, apologies for keeping you waiting. We came as soon as we got the message." Chloe Adams and Grant Miller followed closely behind, their eyes cutting sharply toward Samantha, an unspoken accusation hanging heavy in their gaze. Ethan gave Lucas a slight nod, his expression calm and unreadable, as if none of this surprised him, because it hadn't. Everything had been part of his plan. He turned to Samantha, his gaze so steady it seemed to strip away her composure. He didn't shout, didn't scold, but his silence was heavier than any reprimand. Samantha stammered, her voice breaking in her throat. Mr. Ward, I didn't know. I'm so sore." But she couldn't finish. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes calm, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles, a smile that held no warmth, only deep disappointment. And that, more than any harsh word, was terrifying. Grant Miller, known for his strictness in financial circles, couldn't hold back. His voice cut through the heavy air, sharp and deliberate. "This is how you welcome an Empire Tech partner? A deal worth billions of dollars, and this is the attitude Grand Royale shows." Each word landed like a blade, slicing through the silence. Several staff members nearby lowered their heads, their eyes darting away, as if they wished they could disappear. Guests who had mocked Ethan moments ago now looked at him differently, surprise in their faces, a mix of unease and quiet shame creeping into their expressions as they recalled their own whispered insults. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice was low but carried clearly, every word deliberate, meant for everyone in the room. "I've been here before, in a similar situation, many years ago. But back then I was just a young waiter, judged for wearing a cheap uniform. I thought things would be different now. but it seems I was wrong." His words sank into the silence like stones dropped into still water. Samantha bowed her head, her hands clenched tightly, her face pale. Ethan didn't spare her another glance. He turned to Lucas and gave a single, slight nod. Lucas immediately understood, signaling to an assistant waiting just outside the lobby. And in that moment, everyone realized the power dynamic had shifted. The hotel no longer held the right to judge its guests. It was now the guest who held their future in his hands. With just that single nod, Ethan could make Grand Royale pay dearly for every condescending glance and dismissive word they had shown. And that reckoning was about to begin. The air in the Grand Royale lobby felt compressed, every person frozen in place, no one daring to move. The murmurs and whispers from moments before had vanished, replaced by a suffocating tension that pressed down on the room. Ethan didn't need to raise his voice or give an order. With just a calm glance, everyone could feel the weight of the moment. He walked slowly, circling the reception desk, his eyes briefly sweeping over Samantha before moving on to the other staff members. Each step on the marble floor echoed like the ticking of a countdown clock. Samantha stood stiff, her eyes darting as if searching for a chance to explain herself, but she didn't dare speak. She knew that any word now would only make things worse. Ethan stopped in front of the desk, his hand resting lightly on its polished surface. His voice was steady, deep, and unhurried, but each word carved itself into the minds of everyone present. "I don't need an apology." He lifted his gaze, his sharp eyes cutting past Samantha and landing on every staff member within view. "I need a culture." The words hung in the luxurious air of the lobby, slicing through the complacency that Grand Royale had built its reputation on. It wasn't just for Samantha. It was for everyone there who had grown accustomed to judging people by their clothes, their shoes, or just a single glance. A middle-aged guest who had mocked Ethan earlier now lowered his head, avoiding his eyes. A doorman, the same one who had whispered mockingly into his earpiece, clenched his hands tightly, regret etched plainly on his face. Lucas stood a few steps behind, his expression filled with quiet admiration. Chloe Adams subtly pulled out her phone. She didn't need instructions. That one sentence was enough to tell her this moment would become part of an internal report, perhaps even a case study for partners in the future. Grant Miller gave a firm nod, his usual stern demeanor now even more resolute. Samantha finally managed to speak, her voice trembling as if hanging by a thread. "Mr. Ward, I sincerely apologize." But Ethan didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward her for the briefest second, utterly unreadable, as though her apology no longer carried any weight. He turned to Lucas instead. "We're done here. Let's go." Those few words were the final verdict. Ethan didn't need threats, didn't need to emphasize anything further. With one short sentence, he had made it clear. Grand Royale was no longer a worthy partner, and the price they would pay wouldn't stop here. It would be exacted in the most expensive currency they owned, their reputation. The sound of Ethan's shoes echoed steadily against the marble floor as he walked, with Lucas, Chloe, and Grant following closely behind in a perfectly aligned row. The scene cast a strange silence over the hotel lobby. Guests who had been chatting noisily moments before now stood quietly to the side, instinctively moving out of the way. It wasn't because they were asked to, but because something told them this was not just any guest leaving the hotel. This was a man who had just changed the course of everything in only a few minutes. Samantha remained behind the reception desk, her face pale, her hands gripping the shiny surface so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She watched Ethan's back as he walked away, her eyes filled with panic and regret, but it was already too late. No apology could repair what had just been done. Every word, every dismissive gesture she had made only 10 minutes ago now cut back at her like blades. The revolving doors opened automatically, letting in a flood of light that reflected off the waiting silver rolls, Royce Phantom. Ethan didn't look back, not even once. He didn't need to. His cold, silent departure was the clearest message of all. Grand Royale had lost its chance the moment they chose to judge a man by his appearance. As Ethan stepped out, a young employee standing near the door bowed deeply, his eyes betraying shame. Several guests avoided looking at Ethan. Some even turned their faces away, unable to confront their own quiet complicity. They hadn't caused the incident directly, but they all understood they had been part of it when they stayed silent as everything unfolded. Ethan stepped into the car, and Lucas closed the door gently behind him. At that moment, the flash of a phone camera flickered. Emily Carter, a young tourist, had managed to capture the entire incident. She didn't say a word, simply posting the video online with a short caption. "Respect isn't a reward. It should be the default." Within hours, the video spread like wildfire. News outlets ran bold headlines. Ethan Ward walks out of Grand Royale, cancels $2.8 billion deal over a single act of disrespect. Grand Royale's reputation plummeted overnight, while Empire Tech was praised for placing human values above profit. The next morning, the entire board of Grand Royale held an emergency meeting, but every attempt to salvage their image was futile. Ethan's words had become a quote shared everywhere, on newspapers, across social media, and even discussed as a lesson in modern management. "I don't need an apology. I need a culture." That evening, in the top-floor office of Empire Tech, Ethan stood before the massive glass window, looking down at the city glowing with lights. He didn't smile, nor did he seem triumphant. To him, this wasn't a victory. It was a reminder. Respect is not something to be bought or given as a gift after deciding someone is worthy. Respect should be given by default before you know who they are. So, in business, respect is not a choice. It is the foundation that determines the survival of any brand. A careless word can cost money, but an attitude of disdain can destroy trust, the most valuable asset of all. If you also believe that respect must be the default in every relationship, hit like and subscribe to help spread these values. And don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase, "Respect first," to let the world know you stand on the side of what is right.